Good afternoon. My name is Dalia Habib Linssen. I'm the head of academic engagement at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and I'm really delighted to welcome you, our guests, and our terrific panelists to the third of three discussions, Artist, Student, Curator, Perspectives on Contemporary Art and Design Now. This new series explores how artists, designers, and communities of creative production have been impacted by and are responding to the multiple crises of now. From the current and continually intensifying global health pandemic and related economic uncertainty to heightened social and emotional tensions as a result of ongoing racial justice in the United States and across the globe. In the first week of the series, we explored how artists working in collaborative models are navigating the current realities while acknowledging systemic institutional issues. Last week, our conversation delved into the ways in which the work of designers has responded with immediacy to this moment of crisis and the nature of emergency itself. In the third installment of the series today, we're excited to explore through three different perspectives how the work of artists, students, and curators helps give rise to powerful forms of shared experience and collective remembrance. Before brief introductions, I'd like to share a little bit about the structure of the program. You've probably guessed by now that we're using a webinar format, and the format for tonight will be a conversation followed by time for questions and discussion with the audience. So although we won't be able to see or hear our guests, we invite you to submit questions and comments using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. The questions and comments will be visible to the presenters, and we will answer as many as we can. Finally, we want to note that today's presentation will be recorded, and when the recording is available, we will certainly make that public. And with that, I want to thank my co-collaborators on this project, my colleagues at the museum, Akili Tommasino, Michelle Miller-Fisher, Sophia Walter, and Reto Turing, and everyone at Streamable Learning who's helped us broadcast these programs. And I'm really delighted to introduce our three panelists for today. Babi Oloko is a student at Harvard College. Babi, do you want to just wave? Hello, hello, welcome. At Harvard College, studying intersections between race, art, and the contemporary. In school and outside of the classroom, Babi works in the Harvard Art Museums, is an art board member of the Arts and Literature magazine, and is an advocate for more thorough and thoughtful curricula within her concentrations. Babi has worked at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, the Times Square Alliance, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture. She plans to continue working in institutions with a focus on making art and educational institutions more democratic and inclusive. Welcome, Babi. Kamau Amu Patton. Kamau, do you want to just wave? Say hello. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Kamau is an interdisciplinary artist and art educator. His work is an examination of history and culture through engagement with archives, documents, stories, and sites. Patton's work was featured in the Getty's Pacific Standard Time Performance Festival and as part of the Machine Project Field Guide to LA Architecture. He has completed projects in soundscape studies supported by the State University of New York at Buffalo, the Mellon Elemental Arts Initiative, and the Tang Teaching Museum. Patton has exhibited extensively nationally and internationally, and his work is in the collections of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Thanks for being here, Kamau.
Thank you.
And Akili Tommasino. Hi, Akili. Welcome. I joined the Museum of Fine Arts Boston in 2018, an advocate of emerging artists and scholars of the 20th century avant-garde. He has curated and collaborated on numerous exhibition projects at institutions internationally. Previously, he was a curatorial assistant at the Museum of Modern Art in New York and a Fulbright Fellow at the Centre Pompidou, Musée National d'Art Moderne in Paris. In 2017, Tommasino founded the Prep for Prep, Sotheby's Summer Art Academy, to give New York City high school students of color an early window into the art world and to promote diversity in the field. So welcome, Akili, and thanks for everyone for being here. We're really excited to get the conversation started. And I know this is kind of an impossible task, but I'd like to just begin by asking if Babi and Kamau and Akili, if you could share with us, if you could, in a little bit of time, a little bit about your research, your art practice, your curatorial practice, just sort of orient us into your work. And we can look at some images to go along with that, if you'd like. So Babi, would you like to begin?
Sure. Hello. Thank you for those introductions. My name is Babi, and like Dalia said, I'm studying history and literature and art history at Harvard right now as a rising senior, and I particularly focus on the intersection of ethnic studies and contemporary art. Both within school and outside of school, I'm involved broadly in curatorial pursuits related to contemporary art and work by emerging artists, as well as community organization. And I'm interested in general about how social media acts as an equalizer in both the art and education worlds, and particularly interested in Instagram as a tool of the future, whether that be the future of commerce, artistic display, communication, social justice, anything. You can go to the next slide, please.
Sure.
So when I was thinking about collective experiences in conjunction with the current moment, one of the things that I obviously thought about was the current coronavirus pandemic, which has over 13 million cases worldwide. And I also thought about social media because that's something I find relevant in my, both in and outside of my curatorial practice. And again, I focused on Instagram as a large art sharing platform, which has over 1 billion monthly users. So when I looked on Instagram and thought about what art I was seeing that acted as a intersection with the current coronavirus pandemic, I realized that artists were using Instagram, a tool for collective experience, to comment on the current collective experience of the pandemic worldwide. If you could switch.
Sure.
And I realized that I saw art basically of 3 categories, which either related to social commentary, social capturing, or adaptations to the present moment as artists engaged in different ways talking about the virus. If you could switch, please. So firstly, I wanted to talk about social commentary, which I've seen from a lot of artists coming in the form of PSAs, with many of them deviating from their normal content and their normal types of art to produce works that informed, empathized with, and educated their audiences. So one of the works that I've pulled to show from Instagram was by photographer Flaminia Reposi. Slide, please. So this is a photographer who I noticed deviated from her typical portraiture, which she posts on Instagram, in order to present these images and a few more, which made up her Confinement series, which basically provides commentary through artistic depiction of some of the necessities that we've all found vital during this time, and also commenting on the challenges of social distancing. So I was compelled by this work because of how deviatory it was from what she usually does, and then also just the way in which it acts as an urging for viewers to take care of themselves in the current pandemic, viewers from all over the globe, because she has a fairly large reach. And I was interested in the way that anyone looking at these images could relate to them, speaking broadly. Another artist who I found engaging with social commentary is Lauren Martin, who is an illustrator and a guitar player in the popular indie band Frankie Cosmos, if anyone out there knows Frankie Cosmos. And her whimsical, she's known for really whimsical illustrations, but during this time, she also deviated from her typical work to share more important messages related to the collective experience of the pandemic. So focusing more on an American artist, Martin echoed some of the guidelines shared by the CDC in this series of untitled images where she encouraged viewers to follow social distancing, wash their hands, and socialize in non-physical ways, which, yeah, speaks to what we've been being told by the CDC and other agencies. The next category of art I sort of realized emerging from Instagram was capturing the contemporary moment. So this is more archival works of art where artists were just simply documenting the world around them in this time of collective pandemic and collective social isolation. If you could switch, thank you. So this series was taken by photographer Ryan Booth in the very early days of quarantine. He was tasked with taking images to let people know that despite it all, despite the pandemic, McDonald's was still open. So he decided to take pictures of these glowing gold arches against the darkness of night in a sort of poetic symbolism of American tenacity, but also the symbol of endurance of capitalism, even in these times of collective chaos, which I really enjoyed. And I also wanted to look at one last work to talk about adapting to the contemporary. One work that I didn't put in here was a fashion show created completely online with virtual models in order to adapt to social distancing guideline and rules. But what I have included is a work of art called 28 Kisses I Bought on Craigslist by a social media artist named Shahar Kramer. I thought this was interesting because this work of art was actually made a while ago in around fall of 2019. And the artist basically put an ad listing on Craigslist and paid people to send her videos of them kissing. This was originally a video, but in light of the pandemic and the Zoom-esque nature of this work of art, the artist actually reframed it and has basically let the work take on a new meaning. And she said she will continue to reframe this work of art as 2020 goes on and collective experiences keep growing and changing to meet the current needs of the world. So these were just the works of art that I wanted to share today in conjunction with social media as a collective experience and also coronavirus as a collective experience.
That's really terrific. Thank you, Babi. I wonder, Kamau, if we could turn to you.
Sure. So, hi, I'm Kamau Patton. And so my current project, TELL, is a platform for performance, study, contemplation. The current key question is, how the nature of memory has changed in relation to the encroachment of cyberspace, telematics, transmission technologies. The project name refers to the archaeological term for a mound formed by the accumulated remains left by communities occupying a site over time. So TELL, the project, has been experienced through a myriad of disciplines. So if you could hold on these images, because I want to speak to them in a minute after giving a context for what this project is. So past iterations have been like transmissions, like radio transmissions, walks, conversations, engagement with existing archives, and a publication series. And so essentially, right now TELL is operating as a publication platform. So what you're seeing are some early images, early TELL images, and these are from a project called Leave the Capital. That's a 2009 project. And so these images are essentially images of Black life in the Bay Area. These I gathered while I was living and working in the East Bay. I was commissioned to create a public artwork sited in an area of Richmond, California, known as the Iron Triangle. So the partners for this public artwork were the Richmond Arts Center, the Nevin Center, which is a community center in Richmond, California, adjacent to a park called Nevin Park. And you could, start to flip through these. So the community there was interested in partnering with an artist that would come up with a design for a public artwork to be put in the park. And my interest was in thinking through some creative ways to use the public art funds to support a kind of social practice or a social sculpture. So, as a way to not actually build a physical artwork or a physical monument, I was more interested in creating an infrastructure or an infrastructural monument that would be sustainable and that hopefully would have a lasting impact within the community. And if you just hold here for a second. It turned out that across from the park at the Nevin Center was the Richmond Museum, or is the Richmond Museum of History. And I thought this was really interesting. So I approached the folks at the museum to come on as community partners. And what we came up with was to develop a program that would be a series of workshops on museum practice. We invited youth from the Nevin Center to participate in these workshops. And after they worked through this course at the History Museum, the student final project was to gather historic images, contemporary images, stories, media, objects, things that were representative of life in Richmond. And the exhibition material that they gathered would be archived at the museum and then used to inform future acquisition and exhibition practices. So what you've just seen, these images were the kind of like seed images of this research. And this is the stuff that kind of gave rise to a larger exhibition program that happened at the museum. And then you could slip to the next image. This one is a recent image, a 2017 image from a catalog that was produced as part of a residency at the Tang Museum. And that exhibition residency was called Opener 32 Tell. And the Tang invited me to kind of have an extended engagement with this space, their mezzanine space at the museum. And I used that as a platform for production, hosted a series of performance events, listening events, and worked with the teachers at Skidmore College to do some experiments, pedagogical experiments. And then we produced a catalog. And this is an image from that exhibition catalog. This image was taken in my family home, in the basement of my family home in Brooklyn, New York. So that's just a couple of images to give you a context of what the project has been thus far.
That's great. Thank you, Kamau. Akili, do we want to go to the next slide and you can share with us a little bit about your work and how you know Kamau?
Sure. So good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Akili Tommasino, Associate Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Before briefly discussing some images, I wanted to mention how I met the illustrious panelists I was so thrilled to invite to this discussion. I met Babi Oloko when she was an intern at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston last year, and know her to be a brilliant thinker and leader among her peers at Harvard College. Kamau Amu Patton and I are both alumni of New York City-based gifted education program, Prep for Prep. We met several years ago under the auspices of an arts initiative that we launched with other alumni that manifested in part in the Prep for Prep Sotheby's Summer Art Academy that's now in its 4th year. I'm going to briefly discuss an exhibition that I organized at the Museum of Modern Art in 2017, in which Kamau Amu Patton was a principal collaborator. That exhibition, entitled Projects 107, Lone Wolf Recital Court, is germane to the themes of this discussion because, among other things, the show was effectively a memorial to American artist Terry Atkins, who founded the multidisciplinary performance collective, the Lone Wolf Recital Court, in 1988 in Zurich, or 1986 rather, in Zurich. Project 107 was the first exhibition to reunite the Corps since the passing of Atkins, its founder, in 2014. So Dalia, you can just advance through some of these images. So this is a quote from Atkins. My quest has been to find a way to make music as physical as sculpture might be, and sculpture as ethereal as music is. So one of the core themes of the exhibition was exploring the synesthetic exchange between music and sculpture that really guided Atkins' practice. This is an image from 2013 of Atkins directing 4 members of the core. The core has a very large, expansive membership of rotating collaborators that would be assembled by or invoked by Atkins to enliven his sculptural installations. In this case, 4 horn players here are activating Atkins' perhaps most famous work entitled Last Trumpet, which is comprised of these 4 18-foot long horns that are blown only by embouchure, only by the sort of shape and force of breath on a mouthpiece. Next slide. So these are some of the artists that collaborated with Atkins in the Lone Wolf Recital Corps from its inception until his death. And this core group is the Sacred Order of Twilight Brothers. And this is the group on which I relied to reconstruct performances, to go through the archive, a very physical archive, an object-based archive of props, paraphernalia, regalia that were used by this performance collective throughout the life of the group. Next slide. This is an image. Kamau, perhaps you'd like to chime in here about why this image is special to you, but this is sort of the backstage of a performance that occurred in 2008.
Yeah, we talked about this image earlier. You know, this image is really attractive to me. It shows the intimacy, the camaraderie, the brotherhood, and we spoke about I guess truth in images. You know, like when authenticity, like what does this describe? And I was really taken by what it described of Terry's relationship to Charles Gaines. That you see them on the left side of this image, or my left. I guess the viewer's right. Yeah, it's just really telling in terms of what my experience of being a part of the Corps was like. Just the time getting prepared, being with one another, and just sharing in that experience of brotherhood and how do I say this? Mentorship. So yeah, I was really drawn and excited by this image. I'd never seen it before.
And I want to point out the blue sashes that this configuration of the Corps is putting on in preparation for performance. You'll see these same sashes in several images that follow. So this is an installation view looking into the exhibition with that best known work, Last Trumpet, the first thing that a viewer would encounter. The Museum of Modern Art acquired that work leading up to this exhibition. Next slide. At left, you see a category of objects that I think is really interesting in terms of thinking of different ways an archive manifests. These were props and paraphernalia that were used by the Corps in performances in years past, and were sort of ritualistically preserved and passed down for the use of others in subsequent performances. And somewhat frustratingly for a museum which likes objects to fit in very neat categories, these objects have the dual status of being display objects and objects of use throughout the performances that occurred during the course of this exhibition. Next slide. These are more installation views. You can go through these pretty quickly, Dalia. And I do want to point out that's a video with documentary video of previous performances, including that 2013 performance of Last Trumpet. Next slide. Next slide. You can keep going. That was the lineup. If you go back to the previous slide, that was a lineup of performances and events. And then in the following slide, you'll see Kamau during, I believe, his first opportunity to wear the sash. Do you want to tell that story?
That was at third streaming. I believe that was myself, Charles Gaines, Terry Atkins, and Kavasa Nickens. And third streaming is in New York. That performance, Honey from a Flower Named Blue, I believe, the title of that piece. So yes, that was my first introduction to the core. And interesting to note that you know, wearing the sash and knowing that it has these pieces are communal, right? They are passed from performance to performance, worn by the different personnel that Terry would configure for these recitals. So, you know, wearing that, you do feel that energy, that you are part of something, you know, or a lineage. So it was exciting to be a part of that.
I want to note that Clifford Owens is in that slide. Artist, performer Owens and conceptual artist Clifford Owens, because Clifford and Kamau were my principal collaborators in planning and coordinating performances. And they were really my point of entry to this vast network of artists that were part of the Lone Wolf Recital Corps. Next slide. Those are the prompts. This was at the conclusion of the opening performance of Last Trumpet. And I want to point out, there's a shrouded figure at left. Dalia, you can advance the slide again. This has come out in several of his guises throughout the performances. But one role that he played several times, next slide, is the role of Blanche Bruce. And Blanche Bruce is a character who's a sort of permanent member of the Lone Wolf Recital Corps, which has this constantly shifting membership, who was Terry Atkins' artistic alter ego. The historical Blanche Bruce was the first elected African-American senator to serve a full term in office. He represented the state of Mississippi as a Republican in the United States Senate from 1875 to 1881 during the Reconstruction era. But in Terry Atkins' artistic universe, as his alter ego, Blanche Bruce becomes a cipher for a collective memory and a role to be performed ostensibly by any member of the Corps. So this is Kamau as Blanche Bruce in the opening performance for Project 107 Lone Wolf Recital Corps. Next slide. Next slide. This has come out in another guise as part of an evening where he reprised performance that he did with Terry in 2013, I believe. And Kamau, could you talk a bit about your concept of the body as sculpture and the mask demanding a body?
Yeah, so we did.
Which is applicable also to a character like Blanche Bruce.
Well, yeah, the mask needs a body. The mask needs a body to occupy it. It's like the mask is the persona that's enlivened by the energy of the body that enters into it and gives it and animates it. So I think that Terry really was working through this with the Blanche Bruce as a way to kind of collapse into a persona that would give him a lot more, I think, freedom and mobility, particularly as a multidisciplinary artist, an educator, all these roles. You know, there's all this like schemata that you're like expected to perform through, and this is a space of liberation, right? The lone wolf for me, and I think for Terry, was like a space of freedom to explore, to improvise, and to lose yourself, or to make yourself secondary to the energy that the mask is radiating, or the persona, the identity, is something that I think we shared in terms of what we were exploring. So if we want to talk about this performance, it's interesting because the challenge was to perform or re-perform a piece that Terry and I did at the Arts Incubator in Chicago. We were invited by Allison Glenn and to do this piece. And Terry and I worked through it. It was really, there was someone who was scheduled to record the work, you know, and after Theaster Gates, who was our host, kind of did our introductions and we got everything started. I guess it turned out that the person who was meant to record never actually recorded the piece. Terry was really adamant about things getting recorded, and I kind of heard that. I took that advice from him that that you need to really document, because this is history. We're performing history right now. So I always made it my practice to find some way to document things. So I had a little flip camera with me at the time, and whenever we performed, I would just make sure to set it up and turn it on and make a document. So as I said, it turned out that the person who was supposed to document was perhaps caught up in the moment. We were all caught up in the moment. You know, Theaster is a really gracious host. It was a really great time. Maybe things got forgotten, but you know, he never recorded it. So it ended up that performance, which was an inaugural performance at the Arts Incubator, I had the only documentation of it, which was this low-res flip cam piece. Cut to the MoMA projects exhibition. The request was to revisit some of these performances that we had done as Lone Wolf, and I was invited to re-perform this piece that we had done together at the Arts Incubator. So how to perform with someone who's no longer with us. I mean, I couldn't do it alone. So I proposed that I would perform with recorded material of Terry, sounds from Terry, the images that I had of Terry, and put that together in as visuals to be projected, as recorded material, and then I would perform my part alongside of it. And so this is an image of what came of that performance, which was, I thought turned out pretty well. And prior to the performance, I kind of set the stage by performing through this mask. And this mask, I talked to you, Akili, earlier about this, is a piece that's from my parents' home. It's a part of my family's archive. So I thought that was interesting or important to bring that history into the performance as well. And there's more I could say about this. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. Dalia, could you go to the next slide?
Sure.
And one more. So this is just to show that this is Clifford Owens as Blanche Bruce, just to demonstrate how this character was interchangeable and was performed differently and to different effect throughout this exhibition. So with that, I would like to pose a question to my fellow panelists. How has your work and your community of artists, students, colleagues been impacted by the effects of the global pandemic, as well as ongoing social tension due to racial injustice? And Babi, would you like to start?
Sure. I can start, I guess, from my position as a student. So the virus and its effects, namely that of isolation and the fact that people have to go home, schools are closed. I think as a student, it's forced the community to sort of find itself outside of academia, for students to find their identities when they're outside of the classroom. It's also forced a shift in mindset of how one learns. We have classrooms which are spaces built, designed for learning, and now when we're scattered everywhere else, it's a question of how to continue that learning elsewhere. And I think in regards to your question about racial injustice, as a student, I think lately on social media, there have been a lot of movements by students my age, whether it's high school, college students, with Instagrams like Black at Instagrams, which have been made by students in high schools and colleges to, you know, share their experiences of being Black or minorities at predominantly white institutions. And I know, at least for my high school, there's an account that has been sharing issues really publicly and bringing issues up that students have been taking to the administration for years. But at least in my high school, this is the first time anyone has really listened. And it took that sharing of these experiences on such a collective and public platform for there to finally be higher ups to take notice. I've seen a lot of students holding their institutions accountable more and more in tandem with fighting for other realms of racial justice, whether it's things like just exposing stories, exposing negligence in the staff, or trying to fight for different and more fair curricula. And I think besides my role as a student, as someone who's going to graduate soon and is looking to sort of begin a career, this time has been, I think, destabilizing for myself and that group of people about to enter the workforce in terms of graduating or moving on into an unstable economy, trying to find where they go. And I think it's taken what's already usually a shaky and confusing transitory period and just destabilize it even further. And I'm talking both about the pandemic, right, which has destabilized the economy, but also with accounts and exposés about people's experiences in certain industries, certain companies. It has made people rethink and question where they want to go, what they want to do, and what roles they want to play. So, and I would say finally, as someone involved with artistic communities like a magazine, like the Arts and Literature magazine at my school, and my school's Student Art Collective, which tries to showcase work by student artists, a big thing has been trying to translate this content and these missions into a digital sphere without sort of succumbing to Zoom fatigue, social media fatigue, and trying to keep people engaged. So I would say these are some of the challenges I think people of my constituencies are facing right now in terms of both the coronavirus pandemic and the social tension going on.
Thanks, Babi. Kamau?
Yeah, so this has certainly affected my work on multiple levels. You know, primarily, I wouldn't say primarily, I mean, I'm working as a teacher, as an artist, working within a community of, you know, friends, peers, and what have you. So, you know, professionally teaching, you know, figuring ways to shift to online. And what does that mean for online education? Like, luckily, the school where I'm at, SAIC, the School of Art Institute of Chicago, has a pretty robust online platform. So that was, in certain ways, an easy transition to communicating with students. But the impact of losing the actual infrastructure of the building, like gathering together. I mean, primarily this is with a teaching practice, you know, you rely on kind of a sense of timing, you know, entrainment, just physically being present in teaching, you know, that, you know, I've gotten to the point where, you know, I just know what 3 hours feels like. And that's the typical time that I'm doing a seminar or lecture. I know what it feels like for a group to kind of be in sync around a concern. You know, you can feel the listening, you can feel this presence and exchange. You know when someone is engaged or when it's not. There's a certain physical body language that happens that you lose when you transition online or you just aren't in the presence of folks. So that's a real, it's a huge one because, yeah, learning is physical, you know, and I think that most of us who have grown up through a particular system of education, you know, you take that for granted. But from early childhood, it's just like you get up, you move around, this stuff is over there and that stuff is over there, and you're physically, you know, you're moving to this room for lunch, or you're moving to that room for recess or whatever. So you lose that. And that's certainly been a challenging, or a challenge. In terms of, as an artist, a lot of exhibitions, you know, museum exhibitions were, yeah, postponed or canceled. And the challenge was to figure out ways to shift exhibitions online, because I don't think it was, you know, folks weren't satisfied with just cancellation necessarily. It was like, how can we shift our focus? How can we still salvage this, these exhibitions that had a lot of work invested into them? You know, you all know as museum professionals how much goes into organizing an exhibition and what's at stake for things to be canceled. So I was scheduled to perform a Lone Wolf series at the Pulitzer. So their Terry Atkins exhibition was scheduled to open in St. Louis. Myself, Clifford Owens, Dick Griffin, Charles Gaines, Jamaluddin, Takuma, you know, we're organizing this series of performances, Lone Wolf performances, in support of or adjacent to this exhibition of Terry's sculptural work. It was presenting a lot of the Zurich works, some of the Zurich performances. And, you know, these scores were meant to open in April, go through July. And, you know, the question was like, how do you respond to this? So Clifford and I were invited. Clifford Owens really took the lead on this, to adapt two of the scores to be performed on the Performer Radical broadcast site. And so we took that challenge to be like, okay, like here's a way to continue working. Here's a way to present this work. Here's a way to stay engaged and get through. And, you know, for us, the working together, kind of doing that rehearsal time, working out the kind of the issues of adapting this performance that is not ours, is Terry's, is, you know, a challenge. And it's a big part of our relationship. You know, much of my time with Terry, much of my time with Clifford is spent, you know, through Lone Wolf, through performing. And so it was nice to actually have that tension and have that experience of working through these productions with Clifford. So these are some of the things, some of the challenges that came out of it, some of the closures. We're continuing on with the Pulitzer exhibition, working on a publication. just thinking about ways to take that energy, take that research, and find other containers, other ways to present and to circulate this work. So that's in terms of the closures, the pandemic, the COVID-related closures. The social justice issues, of course, these are ongoing. I mean, these are, and the heightened awareness of them, I think for me, what it speaks to, what it spoke to, is like a desire for education and information. You know, people are, they want to know, we all want to know and have a deeper engagement with histories of social justice, racial injustice in this country. And, you know, what I found circulating over the internet, circulating amongst my friendship group, amongst my professional groups, is that, you know, what do I read? What do I look at? What do I listen to? Where do I get information? How do I slow down and react less? You know, what can I do to like shift my relationship to these ideas or these concerns? And I think that's actually encouraging, you know. And so for me, that was, you know, to meet that challenge, like, yeah, okay, how do we begin to start to like unpack and engage these ideas? Like, what are starting points? Like, what histories do we look to help us navigate through these times? One thing that came up for me was to like revisit the histories of the census, the US Census. That's, you know, a place where, you know, the categories, racial categories in the United States reside in these documents, right? The classification and accounting of American racial identity, you know, happens through census data. So I took a lot of time to look at these histories again and to understand, like, well, where did the kind of white identity or Black identity or Chinese identity or biracial identities, like, how did this stuff get played out? And through the census, what were the agendas that informed the decision making, and how is that playing itself out right now as we go into a census year, right? So that was these are some of the things that came out of it for me, and a lot of really, I guess, challenging conversations with friends and coworkers. But I think hopefully these are things that we can build upon and grow from, and understand where we are connected and what our shared concerns look like, locally and globally.
Okay, so this next, thanks, Kamau. This next question is also for both panelists. What opportunities might you envision to increase accessibility and inclusivity within the realm of art, given the rise of digital interaction, communication, and participation in the post-COVID-19 era? What challenges still exist? And Babi, I'm especially interested in your thoughts on this, given your observations on social media.
I think that I have pretty much always grown up with social media, and I've come to see it as an equalizer, especially in these times, or even thinking about what we're doing right now on this panel. People can come and tune in from anywhere, anytime, away, which is something that was not always the case. And I feel that institutions of art or education or anything that aren't leaning into these possibilities at this time either got right to it when the pandemic hit or are going to be rendered obsolete. I'm thinking about galleries and museums that are now having things like digital tours, digital openings, like Kamau was talking about, taking people's labor and instead of just scrapping it, saying we can't do it anymore, trying to translate that into a virtual space. And I think that's been something that has helped in the strides for accessibility and inclusivity. But something I'm thinking about is institutions not just using social media as something to post on or utilize to share content, but also learning from social media. So now we have this resource where people can talk about what's going on with them, share how they're feeling. I've been following an Instagram account by the name of Change the Museum lately, where museum workers can anonymously share stories of their experiences at wherever they work and post it online. And if you're an institution and you literally have access to a page that's telling you people's issues, what's going on, the times they felt ignored, the times that they weren't heard, and you don't use the resource that's right in front of your fingers for free, then I think that's one of the challenges that we still face, leaning into criticism, especially in this time of cancel culture. People are often on the defensive rather than how do we listen, how does our institution grow and absorb the feedback we're being given on social media. And I think that, yeah, both using social media to increase accessibility and using it to learn how to increase accessibility are both big challenges that institutions are facing right now. But I think this time where everyone's confined to devices has hastened that a lot and forced a lot of critical thinking from these spaces about how they can use media to share and become more accessible.
Thanks, Babi. Kamau, your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, so for me, the issue is around time, is related to time. So this became a real issue with the asynchronous teaching models that we are trying to use at the Art Institute to say, okay, you've got students in various time zones, so you can't really expect that everyone can show up to class at the same time. If someone's in China, if someone's on the East Coast of the United States, the West Coast, if someone's in Europe, like that is really gonna be challenging to get together for a seminar, get together for critique. So that was like the first instance that really brought it to my attention. And then it started to migrate and touch upon, you know, doing online performances. One thing that happened was I gave a lecture at San Jose State University that was, you know, Zoom artist talk. And included in this artist talk was some like pre-recorded information, some pre-recorded performances. There was some live performances. After having seen it, some of the audience, some of the students who watched it had these questions about, well, was that all live? When did that happen? I can't really tell if it was live or pre-recorded. And I was like, well, what does that matter anymore? You know, there's a lag, there's a delay, you know, when you're talking to someone on the telephone, when you're talking, there's always this transmission delay depending on the bandwidth. I mean, none of us are experiencing any of this at one actual time. There's no live now since we're all in this like networked culture. So this is, for me, opened up this, if we shift our attitudes about time and what it means to be like live, right? The desire for liveness, and we let that spread out, and you don't center any one time, right? And you allow every audience member, every participant to like asynchronously like experience something in their own time. That offers some opportunities in terms of like programming and accessibility, you know, not the least of which is like, okay, well, you don't necessarily have to watch it at night if you're like 12 hours, you know, away from me. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm in the daytime, and well, since we're centering my time zone, like you got to watch it at night. Like that's one thing that you get dealt with. People can watch it on their own time. But more to the point if you open it up and you extend it, then the ways that people can engage content shifts, you know? So this is something that I think comes up in relation to something like a film series, like a cinema series, you know, if you talk about like experiencing art from the perspective of like going to a gallery and walking through like a gallery, yeah, there's this ton of time scale. It takes, I don't know, a half an hour to an hour to get through an exhibition. And most people can kind of do that in one shot. But when you shift to something like a cinema series, like most people who are engaging like a series of films are only going to see one or two. They're not going to see the whole thing, right? Because it's like, those are hours and hours and hours. Like you got to pay, you got to go to a site. So it's something like a cinema series where online, if it's all streaming, then you have this opportunity for people to kind of extend their engagement with an idea over a week, over a month, over, you know, because you now have the time and the kind of space and the art gallery. You don't have to deal with the real estate issue. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to deal with like what it means to like actually give space at a site, which is like a different kind of set of costs. So the internet and what the internet allows as an archive is a kind of commons, the kind of space that opens up the ability for people to engage over a period of weeks or a period of months to really go deep into an idea or a subject. And again, I think where this really could be effective is in time-based media, you know, like videos and film and whatnot, and to be able to like present ideas in a much more kind of expansive fashion. So I'm excited about those possibilities as a person that works in time-based media, sound and film video.
A really interesting point, Kamau, and to both of your points, Babi and Kamau, about this notion of time. It makes me think a lot about how we will archive events moving forward, and the notion of ways in which people will access archival material in a sort of reformulated understanding of time is also really interesting. Does it shift how we experience the collective and that sort of notion of collective remembrance? So I'd love to get to a couple of the questions that have been posed by the audience. One that comes to you, Kamau, that the writer says, thank you for sharing your work. This person had the pleasure of seeing your exhibition at the Tang while they were studying art at Skidmore College. And says, during this time at Skidmore, as well as many other white majority institutions, are being called to address and discuss the ongoing inequalities in their institution and the role they play in upholding elitism. This has been especially true at Skidmore Art and Art History departments. As alumni, like this person, reflect on our time in the department. So the question is, from your experience working with the Tang and at Skidmore, what changes do you think need to be made in order to make these institutions more inclusive of the artists of color and students of color working and studying at these institutions?
Okay, well, let's see. I'm gonna hold up this Accelerate. So this is a publication that came out of the Tang, and this Accelerate is, I'm reading from it, this is Access and Inclusion at the Tang Teaching Museum as a project of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And so this is like something where the Tang was given support by the Mellon Foundation to address these issues, right? And sometimes that's what it really takes. I mean, what does it mean to run a museum, to keep people employed, to keep people engaged? I do know that these issues of diversity and inclusion, having artists of color feel like well represented within the collection and the programming, these are challenges across many institutions. I mean, Ian Berry, I believe, who's the director of Tang, has like had a commitment to the support of, you know, myself, Terry Atkins, I mean, artists of color that, and have had a long history of engagement with the Tang. And I do think that they are committed to addressing these issues. And this relationship with the Mellon Foundation is an example of something that they are doing, a substantial kind of move to use this foundation funding to bring in communities of color, to program, to address hiring protocols and whatnot, to be committed to long-term engagement. I mean, my engagement with the Tang was like a 2-year engagement in programming that involved working with teachers, working with students, several series of performances. So, but this was all kind of supported and leveraged through foundation support, right? So I think that it, the whole kind of infrastructure of how museums relate to their funding models, you know, and how those funders can like leverage their resources to help push museums along and support a kind of like endeavor. So that's like one thing that I think happens to kind of understand the whole kind of networks around what it means to like do certain kind of programmings. I know that the Tang has tried to like address issues of class at the institution, and these are challenging conversations as well. So what I say in reference to education, higher education, you know, colleges and universities, is that students have power, you know, and if you as a student desires a certain outcome, then you can leverage because you're like the main resource. They're there for you to like provide you with the education and experiences that you desire. So I think that, you know, the Tang as a teaching museum is responsive to the interests and needs of the students in my experience, you know? And so it means that students have to continue to be involved. Students have to like speak up. Students have to like find ways to engage in conversation and demand that the kind of curricula, the kind of, you know, on the most basic level, showing up to the, knowing who the professors of color are and signing up and showing up to their classes and supporting that, you know, keeping those classes running, making requests for certain kinds of coursework, right? These are the things that I think students can do to like really engage in the dialogue. And I think that, you know, in my experience, there's a lot of power, and I don't know that students are always aware of how much power they really do have on these campuses. So that I would encourage that. I mean, there's a lot of questions going on. The other thing is really has to do with faculty governance, you know, and to create real horizontal structures. I think museums, the Tang is a really interesting hybrid because it is a teaching museum, so it's very connected to to Skidmore, right? But a lot of these institutions can be hierarchical, and I think to have a much more horizontal way of thinking about programming across the departments. We were having some conversations around education departments at museums, and I think that that's a way that a lot of change can happen. So it's not just that it's coming from the curatorial perspective, but that there are curators of education, there are curators of engagement, public programming that can kind of guide the ways that the museum is dealing with programming and engaging ideas and concerns and whatnot. So these are the kind of ways that I feel like you can flatten the hierarchies at institutions, just to like empower different departments and different voices and whatnot. So.
Yeah, I feel like we're in the midst of a lot of these kinds of conversations where we're looking at, very intentionally looking at structures and how structures may or may not be necessarily meeting certain goals, and sort of rethinking those kinds of things.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. And Babi, I wonder, when you think about your own work and your own experience as being a student, when you look to the future, and as you said earlier, you know, really thinking about taking into consideration what will be the next chapter on your journey. What are your thoughts on sort of the future of institutions moving forward in terms of education, in terms of art museums? What gives you hope? What gives you trepidation?
Something that Kamau just said really resonated with me, and that's that idea of horizontality. I think that's something that's greatly needed. As a student, I think it's hard for me to sometimes recognize and leverage the power that Kamau just spoke of because of how vertical things are. So if I have an issue with a class or the curriculum and I take it to my undergraduate advisor, then he's going to say, okay, I empathize with you, go take it up with the director of undergraduate studies. And then I make an appointment and he says, okay, I'll take it up with, you know, the person who's above him. And there's just a lot of loss and inefficiency there. But I think students are beginning to sort of realize their power, especially when that power is part of a collective, when you organize your other students in your concentration or whatever have you and present a united front, especially like I was saying with the Instagram accounts for student stories. I think people realize that when they come together in a united and public way, that power is realized. And we've seen that not just with schools, but with staff at museums and all types of institutions coming together and leveraging that. So I think the main challenge we face is dismantling some of these vertical structures, because I feel that until that's done, it's hard to even sometimes know who or how or where to go with some of these issues if there's always somebody one step up that you need to hunt down and track down and try to get a seat at the table with. And it's honestly just taxing at a point to always be looking up and up and up when, as Kamau said, if we had vertical structures, I feel it would just bring a lot of simplicity and transparency to some of what occurs behind closed doors, meetings that students or staff or faculty may not have access to. So that's the main challenge I see right now, both as a student and someone looking to soon enter the workforce.
That's really interesting. And I know we're past time, but I know that we, I don't know, Akili, do you want to finish up by launching into another question, or you want to sort of wrap things up, or do you have any thoughts to look toward the future as well?
So I guess the question I'd like to wrap up with is what we all envision as either desired, dreaded, or anything between the future of art education and art education institutions, and what they most need to succeed in a post-COVID-19 world. And I think I'm gonna keep my answer kind of simple and vague, but I think the most important thing for institutions to center in conversations going forward and how they'll restructure and continue to develop their programs is empathy. I think empathy needs to be at the core of all discussions going forward. This pandemic has demonstrated in full view the weaknesses of our society, the ways in which those who were already most vulnerable are in that much more peril. And I think empathy needs to guide every positive change that is made in all of our institutions going forward.
Definitely. Any final thoughts, Babi or Kamau?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to echo that. I think that we are, we're in a moment where to be sensitive, to be empathetic, to understand our individual and collective challenges and what we can do as a global community to support one another through this time is that these institutions have the opportunity because of they are nodes, they are places where folks are gathering for work, for support, for and interacting. So these are sites that can affect a great deal of change. And so I think that there's been a lot of conversation that I've had around what does it mean to be local, you know? And I think that the workplace as a site of like local activism is something to explore, and that there can be ways that institutions can evolve, right? Evolve into sites of activism, right? And evolve into sites of real support for the people that they employ, the people whose lives that they touch. So, you know, I think 100% in support of what Akili has said.
For me, I thought of listening, which I think, you know, ties directly into empathy. I think we're in a moment right now where people are being extremely vocal, maybe more vocal than ever, about their wants, their needs, their pains, their desires for their institutions, for themselves. And I think a lot of the things that are being said have been said time and time again, but fallen upon deaf ears consistently and cyclically. And I think now in this moment where concerns are being made louder than ever and are being shared in bigger public forums than ever, it requires an institution's willingness to listen in order to make change.
That's really powerful. And I think in a lot of times we don't take enough time to do that. And I feel like if anything, this pandemic has really forced a kind of reckoning with this notion of time and connectedness to one another. So I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening for this really wonderful conversation. And I don't know, Akili, if you have any parting thoughts that you want to leave us with as well.
I'd like to thank you too, Dalia, and Sophia Walter for organizing this series. It's been really productive and wonderful to engage with great thinkers from across the spectrum. So thank you.
Thank you all very much and have a great night.